Hello, everyone. I'm John Loheis. I'm the chair of the Virtual Symposium 2020 for Communities in Bloom. I'd like to welcome you to the presentation today. We're excited to learn more about invasive species. In our presentation today, the battle with invasives. Are we going to let them win? Before we begin our webinar, we'd like to thank all our Communities in Bloom sponsors and partners at this time for their contribution toward our 2020 special edition. Their support and the support of our registered communities is truly appreciated. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, and thank you so much to the CNLA for their support of our program this year. We have a short video to share today with a message from our sponsor, CNLA's president, national president, Phil Paxton.
Welcome to the 2020 CIB Symposium. My name is Phil Paxton. I'm president of CNLA, and I welcome you to this exciting opportunity. Knowing the people at CIB and knowing the people at CNLA, I know what a great success this will be. So have a fantastic meeting and best of greetings from CNLA. Thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye.
And if I'm not mistaken, Phil's from out west, BC, so we're truly reaching from coast to coast. Before I introduce today's first speaker, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A feature throughout this presentation, and we'll do our best to address them all. You can find the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If it's disappeared, you may just need to hover your mouse around the bottom of your Zoom screen to have it pop up again. And I'll be monitoring the questions and make sure that your questions are addressed to the speakers. So, moving along, our first speaker today is Rennie Grills. Rennie grew up on a mixed farm in central Saskatchewan. He has a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from the University of Saskatchewan, majoring in plant ecology with a minor in crop science, and is a professional agrologist. Rennie's career has spanned over 25 years across 3 prairie provinces, working for Ducks Unlimited Canada, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and Canadian Wildlife Service, and is currently the Resource Management Officer for the Meewasin Valley Authority in Saskatchewan. Rennie is responsible for managing the South Saskatchewan River Valley and Meewasin's prairie sites with targeted conservation grazing, prescribed burning, restoration projects, and an extensive invasive species program. Rennie has sat on numerous boards over the years and is currently on the Society for Range Management, Prairie Parkland Chapter, and Northern Great Plains Section, Saskatoon Farmers Market, the Saskatchewan Invasive Species Council, and the South Saskatchewan River Watershed Stewards. Rennie, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Hey, thank you, John. You can see me in the background here. You can see a beautiful mural of the South Saskatchewan River Valley in Saskatoon. We got fall season here, and we got some beautiful colors here. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Let's see if I can, there we go. Is it working, John? Okay. So yeah, thank you, everyone. So yeah, my name is Rennie Grills. I'm Meewasin's Resource Management Officer. My job at Meewasin is a local regional conservation authority, and we're responsible for the South Saskatchewan River, north and south of Saskatoon. Our mandate is sort of 3-pronged. We're not just a conservation authority, but we're also responsible for educational programming in the River Valley and also development in the Saskatoon region. So providing public access to the River Valley in terms of everything from a trail network through the city of Saskatoon. If you've ever been to Saskatoon, you'll know Saskatoon's famous for its fabulous trail network along the River Valley. And so that's part of our mandate, is to provide that access. Within the Meewasin, we're responsible for 80 kilometers of river valley north and south of Saskatoon, and including through the city itself, and also about 17,000 acres of land, which is about 6,700 hectares. So it's a large land base that we manage. And our land base is very diverse. We have native grasslands within the city limits that we manage. We have sand dune complexes to South Saskatoon. We have islands in the river that we look after, so many of them are conwood forested lands, and then also the riverbank itself. So that diversity of landscapes also makes it quite challenging from a management perspective. So we also have sites that have urban development all the way around us, so they are a park within the city, but it is a natural park with native grasslands that we're trying to manage, to rural areas that are in the middle of farming communities as well. So that provides us with a unique complex of landscapes to manage, but also unique pressures as well. So we're trying to manage that interface between urban and rural on our sites. Back in 2017, Meewasin developed a valley-wide resource management plan to help guide what our goals and objectives are from a management perspective. So with that plan, we identified what our main targets were for conservation. We identified grasslands, the river valley, wetland complexes, and also something called swales, which are post-channel glacial scars of the South Saskatchewan River. When the glaciers melted here in Saskatchewan 10,000 years ago, they left these sort of ribbons of wetlands and rocky prairie sites, and that drained into the river. And so as part of that planning process, we identified the conservation, the threats to these targets. And what came out was our #1 threat was invasive species to all these ecosystems. So our river valley, we're experiencing issues, everything from Dutch elm disease in our beautiful urban forest to the potential threat of emerald ash borer that's coming in from out east. It's now appeared in Manitoba. We're worried our native green ash forest is going to be hammered. To things like aquatic invasive species like zebra mussels and flowering rush, to also just invasive plant species. And the same with our grassland and wetland sites, everything from purple loosestrife to invasive forbs like leafy spurge. So as we did our planning process, we identified our #1 priority for our programming from a resource management perspective is dealing with these invasive species. And so we've really increased our effort on controlling invasives and really trying to find partners and funding sources to continue our program. So with invasive species, it's always a real challenge is when do you start dealing with invasive species infestation? How do you go about it? And is it too late to deal with it? So quite often, when we talk about invasive species, prevention is sort of the key. If you could prevent an invasion of coming in to your community, your dollars are better well spent and you're more effective in control. So here in Saskatoon, we've been fortunate. Dutch elm disease, we've only had 2 occurrences of Dutch elm disease in the last 5 years. This year we just had another occurrence in the city. But that ounce of prevention, that work that we've been doing with our partners at the City of Saskatoon to prevent the spread and or the occurrence of Dutch elm disease coming into the city is probably way worth the effort compared to further on throughout the line. Once you hit to that stage where it starts showing up, different like a plant species or wild boar or any invasive, then you start the eradication. And the sooner that you can deal with eradication, the better. Because as soon as that population becomes too large or too expanded, your costs go up, the area that's infected goes up, and it takes more time and effort to control. And also your impact is a lot greater on your ecosystems. And so yeah, the sooner you can deal with invasives, the better. So One of the things that I'm involved with is the Saskatchewan Invasive Species Council, and we have discussions at the table on what are these new invasives that are coming into the province, what's happening in other jurisdictions near us, and how can we monitor and deal with these as they arrive. And so if that early prevention, and then as soon as we find those new species, dealing with them right away in that eradication stage, in the long term saves us a lot of time and money. This slide also shows that sort of same concept where your level of effectiveness and your costs. So your level of effectiveness and your costs are a lot cheaper if you deal with that initial patch of invasives right off the start than if you let it keep establishing and proliferating until it gets to a point where you can no longer control it. And then you have to decide, is it worthwhile to keep going, or do you cut your losses and start focusing on other invasives? And that's up to each organization, each community to decide. But sort of the way I look at invasive species, if you have to look at it as sort of a peeling an onion. You have to multiple layers and over time. And one of those things is if you can start with those initial infestations and slowly work away at it, you can get ahead. So, it depends on the situation that you're dealing with. And I know Nancy's going to talk about one of the problems she's been dealing with Phragmites that she said they had to go all gangbusters in and deal with. And we have the same situation as well. Sometimes you just have to go in there headstrong and go after that big patch and start dealing with it. But if you have the time, or if you don't have that capacity to do that, sometimes it's easier just to go and pick out those outliers, take out those small little patches, and then work your way to that center. And that sometimes it's such a daunting task to go into that big core area. So you just sort of work your way towards that middle, and especially if you have limited resources, limited volunteers, or limited funds to do the work. If you're taking an integrated approach too, some of these outliers can be dealt with a different tool, and with that core area, you can use a different tool for that. And I'll talk about sort of this integrated approach in the next slide, or one of the next slides. So this is one of my sites here. It's within the city of Saskatoon. It's called the Northeast Swale. And we also have several other conservation areas within that, Crocus Prairie and South Central Grasslands, and then the river valleys on the west boundary there. This area is is under development. There's new housing that keeps popping up around this natural system. And as you can see from this map, we have a wide array of invasive species, everything from European buckthorn, which is a tree species, to absinthe, nodding thistle, leafy spurge, and common tansy, which are forbs species. We also have large infestations of invasive grass species as well. And so, when you're trying to tackle this problem with invasive species, first step is actually knowing where the problem is. Start mapping it out, start documenting, and then use that as a way to develop a strategic plan on how to start tackling these infestations. If you look at the dots on the map, you see those dots, you get all concerned and scared, and your first inclination is, I'm going to give up because it's too daunting of a task. But if you start picking away at those dots and slowly working away at them, eventually you can get them under control. So, one of the approaches is taking an integrated approach. So it's not just one tool, it's potentially multiple tools. And it depends what you have available in your community or your skill sets with your co-workers or your volunteers, and how that natural ecosystems are managed in those areas. So here in Saskatoon, we're on the prairies. Grazing and fire played a key role in the management of our prairie grasslands. So those are two tools that we have available for use. We also have things like hand removal, mechanical removal, herbicide depending on the species, also biocontrol agents that are sometimes available. We use biocontrols here in Saskatoon for leafy spurge and purple loosestrife, and we're finding them to be quite effective. But also part of that integrated approach is using awareness, having the general public understand why you're dealing with those invasive species, and also those consequences of those invasive species moving into these natural areas. So part of it too is understanding the ecosystem that you're in and what you're dealing with. So in Saskatchewan here, like I mentioned before, our grasslands evolved under fire and grazing. 10,000 years of bison roaming the prairies, and 10,000 years of wildfires and naturally set fires, which we've removed from the landscape, but we do use cattle and sheep and goats as a surrogate. Fire has pretty much been removed. We do get wildfires that occur in our grasslands, but also many agencies are starting to use fire as a management tool. And then also our grasslands evolved under climate. When you think of the prairies, you think of the great drought of the 1930s or the 1980s, or the wet cycle we just came out of here in Saskatchewan for the last 10 years. So that's also a factor in how we manage these sites, and you have to take that into consideration when you're designing your management systems. So one of the challenges we have is we're trying to manage invasive species, whether it's increases in shrub species or non-native grass species. And so this site is called the Sask Natural Grasslands. When I went out to this site 30 years ago when I was a university student, this was wide open prairie and we had very few trees and shrubs on the site. However, because it was surrounded by city, we were concerned with using fire and grazing as a management tool. And what we've seen is a shift of this plant community to more of a forested community. And so we're trying to bring back the natural processes. As you can see, we're surrounded by a community, so very difficult to bring in animals to graze or to start fires. So we've started using something we're calling conservation mowing, where we're trying to simulate grazing by going in and mowing certain patches to sort of on south-facing slopes to dry out the site to remove the Kentucky bluegrass cover, which is an invasive grass, which will hopefully reduce the shrub cover over time. And so we're using that as a surrogate from a grazing burning perspective to to try and manipulate and manage some of these invasive species. Also, we'll if we can't use a herbicide application for certain species, we'll try and maybe use mowing or other mechanical removal as well. Grazing. So Meewasin has been using grazing as a management tool in the city of Saskatoon for about 16 years now. We just completed our grazing program for this year. And we've had up to 425 sheep grazing in one of our sites at a time. So this photo here is from the Northeast Swale from about 4 years ago. And you can see those little white dots in that photo. That's 425 sheep roaming within the city limits. So, many municipalities in the prairies are starting to use grazing as a management tool, whether it's goats or sheep, to try and remove invasive species like leafy spurge or shrub browse as well. So, that's a natural process. It's a natural way of controlling invasives. However, one of the concerns or one of the biggest costs with this is finding a proper shepherd or producer to work with that can also engage with the public and tell people what they're doing and how they're doing. Also, you need to find a producer that's really has really good animal husbandry practices, that is really good steward of their animals. But also the insurance costs can be quite high, and which is also a limiting factor as well. We found that insurance could be upwards of $10,000 to $15,000 a year just for bringing animals in for grazing in city limits. And the concern is these animals will get out, get onto roads, they might get into people's yards, or there might be issues between human livestock conflicts. So if you're looking at this as a management tool, it's very effective. The public just loves it, but you also have to take that into consideration, is that public safety and that insurance cost. Prescribed fire. So yeah, Meewasin's been actually been working with the city of Saskatoon and the University of Saskatchewan, conducting prescribed burns within the city limits since the late 1980s. So we've been using fire as a management tool for nearly 30 years. And for ourselves, the grasslands evolved under fire. Fires historically would have occurred in the Saskatoon region every 10 to 15 years, or 8 to 15 years, and any month of the year. So if you get a January when a Chinook comes through from Alberta, melts all the snow, or we have no snow cover, fires would have naturally occurred. Those would have been accidentally set, but we would have had fires on this landscape. So we use fire as a management tool to remove invasive trees and shrubs. We've ran fire through European buckthorn and Carigana patches. We use it to control Kentucky bluegrass that's invading our native grasses, and also as part of our integrated approach for controlling leafy spurge. We'll go in and we'll burn a patch of leafy spurge, then we'll stick sheep in the next year to graze it, or we'll add our biocontrol species in to deal with it afterwards. One of the challenges with using fire as a management tool is training. It's very difficult. You have to have well-trained staff. You have to have the right equipment. B is making sure you have all the permits. Then you also have to ensure managing smoke. You don't want when you're using a fire to have smoke blowing into the neighboring community, and so you want to reduce smoke issues. And then I mentioned insurance on the grazing. Insurance as well on using fire as a management tool can be very, very cost prohibitive as well. Usually what I do is every fall we plan about 20 different burn units on various sites. We prepare them in the fall with fire guards. We mow fire guards in, and then we prepare them for the next spring as well. Say of the 20 burn units we prepare, if I get 5 burnt, I'm very happy. So it's a lot of prep work, but it's to take advantage of the weather conditions and the climatic conditions. So also integrating the tools. And so it's not just one tool is correct, multiple tools. And what I've been finding is if we're using the multiple tools, whether it's the biocontrols, the grazing, the burning, hand pulling, volunteers, the more you integrate the tools, the more effective your programs become. So, as part of invasive species controls is knowing your natural landscapes, knowing how your systems evolved, and also how to use them to enhance that ecological integrity. If you don't enhance or manage those systems, invasive species will take over. And that's what we were finding in our sites is the lack of natural disturbance, grazing, and fire has seen an increase of invasives. You need to start somewhere. Sometimes you have to take those small steps and then slowly work up into the larger impacts. And you need to incorporate an integrated approach. You have to restore those natural processes. Engagement of the public is very critical. If they're on your side and they support what you're doing, the more acceptability you have and the more work you can get done on the landscape. And then don't be scared to try new tools. I attend a lot of conferences across the country and in Western Canada, and I'm always talking to people to find out what they're doing for their management techniques for invasive species. And then I'll come back and I'll try them. If something I can do here, I'll try them and see if they work. And yeah, don't be scared to try new tools. So with that, thank you very much. I appreciate you attending the webinar, and thank you for inviting me to this. This was lots of fun.
Well, thank you, Rennie. We do have a couple of questions, so pardon the pun, but you can field them.
Okay. So go ahead, John.
It's a question from Carol. How do you? Well, maybe you can unrelease your shared screen and then they can see you answering as well.
Let's see if I stop share. There we go.
Okay, so question from Carol. How do you deal with tansy?
Okay, yeah, so common tansy is a plant that's came from Europe. We're actually here in Saskatoon region, or in the northern half of Saskatchewan. We've had it probably for about 40 years, and it's really spreading across northern half of Saskatchewan, or the grain belt of Saskatchewan. This plant species, it has a fibrous root system and also a very prolific seed producer, and the seeds hang on through the winter and then get dispersed as well. What we're using is herbicide. There's some registered herbicides that you can use. We find that digging isn't quite effective because you can't quite get the full root system. There has been some research done by the Ministry of Agriculture in Saskatchewan looking at goat grazing as a management tool, and that can be quite effective as well. I have done some prescribed burns where I've burnt through a patch of old dead standing common tansy and then have gone in and done herbicide application. But from a biggest bang for your buck, I find herbicide is the most effective, but you're looking at probably multiple years of application. And but that one site that we have, the Saskatchewan Natural Grasslands, when I started here 6 years ago, I spent like a week using herbicide application. This year I was down to half a day. So it's just, if you get on top of it, you can knock it back.
Okay, and the second question was, do you use a dog to help shepherd the goats or sheep together? So that's almost two questions. Do you have goats and sheep together, or do you also use a dog within that mix?
Yeah, so our
From
shepherd that,
Odette, by the way,
yeah.
Odette from Montreal.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks, Odette. Yeah, so our shepherd that we work with has won several championships with sheepdogs, and so he uses the dogs on whistle commands to move the sheep around. So, and his dogs are trained to actually move sheep and goats and also cattle. So we have that capability with the shepherd we use. We have worked with some producers in the past that didn't have the sheepdogs, and depends on how their operation is set up. We can customize our grazing based on what their operation is. So the one person we worked with, she didn't have the dogs, so we just set up our grazing system differently with electric fencing and to move them around that way.
Okay, and we have some more dialogue from Lucy Gagne. The CFIA could bring some help, if not already involved on your committees, as they regulate some of the pests that you mentioned. They sure could help with awareness, detection, and training. So just a little side note from Lucy. From David Solos, what are your strategies for Japanese knotweed?
We're very fortunate, David, that we don't have Japanese knotweed yet in Saskatchewan. So, I've done some reading on the species from other jurisdictions, but I've never had to deal with it. And I sure hope we never get it here. So sorry, I wish I could help you.
I was speaking a little bit about your presentation. It's amazing that in terms of the some 25 or 30 instances of threats that you have on your chart, that you listed invasives as number one. Why do you feel encompassing all of those threats that's becoming number one?
Yeah, so when we were looking at our at the invasives, the invasives are really a symptom of all the other threats, like habitat fragmentation, urbanization, climate change. Really, a lot of those invasives are a result of those issues. And, we can't, locally we can't deal with climate change. Quite often we can't stop development, but we can deal with the invasives. So that's why it sort of rose to the top. Also, we felt that the way the schematics worked for ranking everything, we could have the biggest impact with trying to deal with those invasives as our resource management program.
Okay, and
but yeah,
a final question from, I think, Slovenia, Anton Schlaus. Do you have a big problem with ambrosia like we have in Europe?
Nothing here in Saskatchewan that we've come across yet, but yeah, we don't have that issue yet.
Okay, I was, as the final note, before we move on to Nancy Vittler's presentation and the battler and her army of people who have dealt with that on the Phragmites issue, I was fascinated by your advice about tackling this, and why I say it is, it was kind of encouraging to me that you had the circle diagram where you basically attack the outliers first, and that is some incredible advice. Because a little effort then can go a long way, is basically what you're saying through that slide. So, I'd like to thank you today, Rennie, for your presentation. We really very much appreciate it. Next, I would like to introduce Nancy Vittler. Nancy retired from Community and Social Services with the Regional Municipality of Halton to live in Port Frank's Lambton Shores, and has become the driving force behind Phragmites management and habitat restoration in this lakeside community where she and her family have cottaged for many years. She is a member of the Ontario Phragmites Working Group, and as chair of the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group, this committee has successfully formed partnerships with the municipality, local conservation authorities, the Lake Huron Centre for Coastal Conservation, Nature Conservancy Canada, Ducks Unlimited Canada, cottage associations, and private landowners. She has been recognized by Lambton County Museum and Lambton Wildlife Incorporated for her environmental work, and assisted Dr. Janice Gilbert with the creation of the Invasive Phragmites Management Plan for the municipality of Lambton Shores. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy. Please go ahead.
Thank you, John, for the introduction. And I'm delighted to be participating in this speaker series and to spread the word about invasive Phragmites australis, a plant that was identified in 2005 as Canada's worst invasive plant by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And on your screen, you will see what I refer to as a sea of Phragmites. And this is why we became concerned in Lambton Shores. Lambton Shores is located in the southeast basin of Lake Huron, and we have many areas of natural and scientific interest. And when we saw this plant taking over many of our special wetlands and coastlines, we became very concerned. I want to, before I begin my presentation, I'd also like to mention and give special thanks to Dr. Janice Gilbert, wetland ecologist, who created the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, and who for the past 15 years we have been working very closely with in establishing our management plan and moving ahead to get rid of this invasive species. So my presentation, I'm going to talk about, first of all, what the plant looks like, how it spreads, why we need to be concerned, the Lambton Shores experience, and control methods. And I also want to point out that I'm really delighted to know that there are people who will be hearing this presentation who are in Western Canada, because you have an advantage over what we have had here, in that you will know what Phragmites looks like before it becomes a huge problem, because early detection and rapid response is critical when dealing with this plant. So this is a monoculture stand of Phragmites in Kettle and Stony Point First Nations, just down the shoreline from where I am right now. Behind this wall of Phragmites is Lake Huron. And this was on the shoreline. The grass grows between 15 and 20 feet high, and in 1 square meter, there are about 200 stalks. The root grows exponentially, or the plant grows exponentially, and the roots give off a toxin which destroys all of the native vegetation in the surrounding area, and hence the large monoculture cells. And we refer to these large cells in the interior as having dead zones, because there's nothing that is growing. There's no wildlife. Around the perimeter, you'll find a few red-winged blackbirds, but when you get in, if you can get into the center of one of these cells, it's a dead zone. This is a picture of the seed head, and we are always concerned that this is a very pretty purple plume, and we see occasionally, often, I will say, many people use this in their decorating. We would strongly encourage you not to do that. And also, this slide shows the density of the canopy. And that's really something to keep in mind as I get further into my presentation. I'll be talking about control methods, and this creates a very dense canopy. So how does it spread? It spreads by seeds, it spreads by rhizomes and stolons, and as I mentioned, it grows exponentially, predominantly by the rhizomes. 200 stems in a square meter, and they also, rhizomes can also go 10 meters in depth. So it grows exponentially, and it's very quick to establish in disturbed sites. So this is a picture of a seed head in the fall. If you are ever along a shoreline or near a wetland and there's an infestation of Phragmites and it's a windy day, it's just like being in a blizzard. And this is a picture taken again from Kettle and Stony Point First Nations. And this is another picture of a seed head with new shoots germinating. And this photo is of the rhizomes and stones, and this is a special concern this year with the high water levels and high winds. The rhizomes are being ripped out of the coastal dunes. I have another picture of it established in a dune, but they're being ripped out and transported along the shoreline, and that's how it spreads. And that's why it's important that people realize that it's not just one property owner who has an issue. This is an issue for all of our Great Lakes, for all of our shorelines on both sides of the border. And this is a picture of a stolon in St. Joseph's Island on Lake Huron, and you can see that every 8 to 12 inches, a new plant is becoming established. And that's why in the background, you see this is a new cell that's just developing. But within a year, 2 years, that whole area will be taken over by Phragmites. Each little root or each little plant that starts will be a new plant. Just let me. Sorry about that. So this is, as I was saying, this is a picture of a stolon in St. Joseph's Island on Lake Huron. Okay, and this is the cross section of the dunes, again in Kettle and Stony Point, and you can see how dense these roots become. And the next slide is what's giving Phragmites a helping hand. So Phragmites is spreading a number of reasons. Land use changes in the past 25 years, a lot of construction along the roadsides. The transportation corridors are a major spread vector. Agricultural drainage ditches also become a major spread vector, and increasing issues arise with blocked drainages, flooded fields, reduced crop production. And so farmers are becoming more and more concerned. The declining Great Lakes water levels have increased colonization and expansion, and that would have happened about 12 years ago when we first started out. The water levels were very low, and the Phragmites was spreading again exponentially. And now what's happened is we have the reverse of that. We have high water levels, and that has created a whole new set of problems, because we in Canada, we do not have a herbicide that is approved for overwater use. And so our hands have been tied until recently. And so the herbicides, we need a herbicide that we can use over water level or over water in order to get this under control. And another thing that's giving Phragmites a helping hand are the ATVs. So here's a picture of some heavy equipment, and I'm sure that you see this when you're traveling any of the 400 series of highways. The machinery is in the roadside ditches, doing construction, maybe working in the culverts or gas lines, whatever. And then the machinery goes down the shoreline and or down the highway to another work site. We became especially concerned about 7 years ago when wind turbines were going into our area. And we actually approached the county and expressed concern about their contributing to the spread of Phragmites. And now invasive Phragmites is part of all land use agreements that the county enters into with the energy folks. So we were really pleased to see that. And I also want to mention that the Ontario Invasive Plant Council created a clean equipment protocol for Ontario. And we have been really pushing that any contractor who does work for municipalities or counties must have that clean equipment protocol knowledge. And we have actually given a few workshops in that in Lambton County. So here we have a picture of an agricultural drainage ditch. This is in Sarnia. And this drainage ditch, you can see how far it extends. Well, it goes into Lake Huron. And so the drainage ditch has become a major spread vector. Now, the good news with this is the Telford drain. And the good news is that over the past 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of work done and it's pretty much under control. But you have to stay on top of it. You can't think, oh, it's gone now, we can rest assured it's not going to be coming back, because this plant is very persistent and touch up is extremely important. And this is a picture of stolons, and this was in when the waters were low in Kettle Point, and you can see how every 10 to 12 inches or so a new shoot is springing up. And here's, this is a new patch of Phragmites. It's just getting started. And, you know, at first it doesn't look threatening. It just looks like a grass that would appear in a prairie or along the shore with marram grass or whatever. But the difference between this, of course, is that it spreads so fast. And all of a sudden you have a huge, dense colony of it, and it's more difficult to get it under control. You can see the ATV tracks, and this will be going into the interior, into wetlands, and the Phragmites will follow. So why do we need to be concerned? We need to be concerned because of the loss of recreational opportunities. Whether you're a birder, you like to hike, you're a boater, you fish, hunt, recreational opportunities are really affected by this. And an example, just across the road from our home, we had, this is where we started out doing our work in Lambton Shores, and we had a huge monoculture stand for acres of it. And the first day that we started working, there were people coming and entering the pond through the route that we had created with their canoes, and kids started fishing from the shoreline, and they hadn't been able to do that for years. So recreational opportunities, tourism, our tourism is greatly impacted, and that was one of the reasons why we were able to get our municipalities supporting us so much in Lambton Shores and in Port Franks, because our economic base is tourism and agriculture. And that also results in a decline in shoreline property values. Housing values were, well, an example, one cottage 4 years ago couldn't sell for close to, I think they were headed on the market for less than $200,000, and it just sold this past summer because we got rid of all of the Phragmites, and they could advertise as seeing the shoreline and having beautiful sunsets. It sold for over $500,000. So there's definitely an impact with your property values. The hazards of fire, Phragmites fires are quite impressive to watch. If you Google frag fires, they're very very threatening. Flames can go 50 feet in the air, and they burn very hot. And they have closed down highways in the States if frag fires start along the roadsides. Another hazard is blocked views at intersections, and also the loss of natural habitats. And that's where we also we were really concerned in Lambton Shores. I want to draw your attention to the picture on the bottom left. This is a picture that is from Lambton Center Church Camp, and they have a huge program year-round, actually, for youth, and they have seasonal campers. And this is a picture taken 5 years ago of their lakefront. And they had to stop all of their recreational activities. And you can see the sign, it says swim at your own risk. They put in a pool to accommodate their swimming program. And so, you know, it really does have an impact. And here's picture taken from Rondo Provincial Park. And Phragmites has a significant, results in a significant reduction in biodiversity, and is a major impact on wildlife, including many species at risk. And turtles will get into it and then they can't get out. And so it's a real concern. So our community group, we got together mainly because there was frag on our beach in Port Franks, and we're a group of dedicated volunteers committed to working with other organizations and private landowners to restore wetland habitats and beaches. And to date, our restoration work has been initiated in well over 300 acres along the shoreline and into the watershed of Lambton Shores. Our success can be attributed to a few things, but I want to mention two in particular. One is you need to have a plan. You need to have a management plan. And we had one that was approved by our municipal council in 2014, and we've asked to have funding to update it because so much has changed in the tools that we can use now. And the other reason why we have been successful is that we were the first municipality in the province to take a watershed approach in dealing with this. We looked at the beach and we got the Phragmites under control on the beach, but then when we looked around at the rivers and the creeks and the roadside ditches, we decided that we couldn't stop at the beach. We'd just continue having more problems. And so we have approached farmers, golf courses. We have reached out to the county, the province, and including the municipality, private landowners. And that's has really helped us in becoming successful, and helped us to receive the award, the recognition that you can see on the screen. So I'm going to talk. There's so much to say about this, and I find it very challenging to deal with all of the things that we have dealt with over the past 12 to 13 years. But I'm going to mention some of the different control methods that we have used. We've done just about everything we can, and when we have been frustrated, we've MacGyvered and created our own tools. But this slide shows in the bottom left-hand corner this hand wicking. Now you can't hand wick; you have to actually apply it with a paintbrush. Hand wicking did involve having a rubber glove and then a car wash mitt and dipping it into the chemical and running it back and forth along the stalks. That works in a very sparse area like what you can see in this picture. But if you're remembering what that first screen looked like of the sea of Phragmites, it doesn't work there. And that's why we need the herbicides, and we need to be able to spray. In the picture above, you'll see a retrofitted Argo. This is, of course, requires two people, one person to drive the Argo. The other stands on a platform with a railing and applies herbicide from above, broadcast sprays. This is, and all of these things are very site specific. This method, if you have you have to apply for a letter of permission from the government, or a letter of opinion from the government. And if you have certified, qualified people doing this, it's very effective. And the first, our first project area where we tackled it this way, the first year we had 87 to 95% success rate in getting rid of the Phragmites, and then we needed to do touch-up after that. And I want to say that all of the native vegetation came back, and it came back very quickly. Then the slide on the top right, this is spraying from an Argo. And this is a method too that can be used if the cells are not 15 to 25 to 20 feet in height. And it's also used in touch-up, as is the method below that, backpack spraying. Once we got the rid of the 95% of it, and the native vegetation came back, there was also Phragmites, and so you have to use a backpack and a wand so that you're not getting rid of the native vegetation. So there's another challenge that people are faced with in dealing with this plant. And here's another. This is a marsh master. And this is what was being used in Long Point. Long Point received a permit, this emergency use permit, to apply chemicals over water. And they have had a 3-year project that included Nature Conservancy and a lot of the cottage associations, Ducks Unlimited Canada, and a lot of the hunting groups in Long Point. And the success of that project has been, it's been so successful. And there's all kinds of data that was collected and cooperating with the University of Waterloo. And the results were very, very positive. And this is, again, dealing with frag. This is a photo taken from our project area that I was referring to. And this picture was taken in March. The roller, the Argo is pulling a roller. We flattened the plant because Phragmites will stand tall for a few years. And so we rolled it with the intent that then in the growth season, we would be able to easily see the Phragmites, and we would not be wasting the chemicals when we sprayed. This is in March. We sprayed or applied herbicide in September, October. You can do it earlier, but because we live in a tourist area, we have a lot of visitors in the summer. So we chose to do it in September. And then the chemical was just hitting the new growth. Then we went back the following March, and with a prescribed burn, a certified prescribed burn and wildfire, a burn specialist, and our local volunteer fire department, we did a controlled burn. And it was very successful. This is just a photo of this was on an island, a small island. So this was not flattened before it was burned because it was in a controlled space. And you can see how high these flames are shooting. It's quite frightening, actually. And okay, dry and wet locations. Another method for both dry and wet locations is spading. We've had great success with this. I have to mention that if you're spading in water, murky water seems to have better results because the plant can't photosynthesize. The picture on the right is that is me. I'm out in the pond across the road. In that area where we had such great success in getting 95% of it, the following year were some shoots that reoccurred, and the water levels had gone up, so we couldn't apply chemicals. So I went down with a spade, and that was very successful. The water is murky though. It's very challenging. It's very difficult because there's a lot of, in this situation, there's a lot of debris in the water. The picture on the left is a picture of camp counselors down at Lambton Center. We did a workshop and showed them how to remove Phragmites on shore and in the shallower water, and that has proven to be very successful. Lambton Center, there's no Phragmites right now, and it's interesting, if you look at those benches, they were put there before Phragmites came in, when people could go down and enjoy the shore. Here's dealing with Phragmite in wet sites, and there are two extremes here. The one on the right is in deep water, and this is one of our volunteers with the raspberry cane cutter out in her kayak, and she is removing the raspberry cane cutter. Is you can get them at Lee Valley, and it has an extendable handle and a very sharp hook on the end, so you can run the hook down the stalk of the Phragmites to quite a depth, and then gently tug it and remove it. So that's been successful. The photo on the left is one of the most challenging situations, and that is when we have dense stands of Phragmites in shallow water, like in a lot of the wetlands. And this is why we need to have a safe herbicide for overwater use. these areas are often, they have beaver stumps, and you find rebar and all kinds of things that make it almost impossible for machinery to handle it. And so two extremes in wet sites. And here's a picture again. This is in Port Franks at a L Lake, which is a provincially significant wetland. And you can see we're using plastic sleighs to collect the Phragmites after it had been cut and then taken up onto shore. And the Invasive Phragmites Control Center has a manual cutting crew. And on the right hand side is a picture of one of the crew members. You can see he has chest waders on. They go out in deeper water with still saws. And it's important to know, though, that still saws aren't supposed to be used in water, so they have to be maintained after just about every day when this is done. But they go out with still saws and cut and remove. So both of these pictures are of the crew from the Invasive Phragmites Control Center. And the control center is a creation of Dr. Janice Gilbert, and it's cutting to drown, and that's the premise. And it's been very successful in deep water. So the control efficacy is water depth dependent. And I'm going to add there, and if it's murky water as opposed to crystal clear water, because up on the shoreline in Oliphant and in Port Franks on the beach, the water is crystal clear, and you can still cut deep. And because the stalk can photosynthesize, or the plant can photosynthesize, it seems to grow back again, but repeatedly has results, good results. There's the short operating window. Lowers the impacts. We don't start using the truck source until after July 15th because of the regulations with spawning fish and nesting birds, etc. So we have to be very careful. But the good thing with the truck source is that you can go into the fall. And the picture on the bottom is of a truck soar. And we are 3 years ago partnering with Bruce Power. Dr. Gilbert arranged to have this machine. It's a Swedish designed amphibious machine, and we have 3 of them. This machine can go out into the deep water of the lake, and it can cut deep. It has a blade, but it also has a rake. And the rakes, of course, are used to then collect all of the Phragmites and transport it into shore. And this is a picture, again, from L Lake, where we've been doing work the last 2 summers. And you can see from these slides, not only the height, but the depth of this plant and how challenging it is to get it under control. And the Janus is cutting in these pictures. And then getting rid of the biodiversity, or getting rid of the biomass, is extremely important. And so we created this barge that you can see in the picture, and it's interlocking decking from Jet Float. And then we ordered a fish net from Lunenburg, and the truck soars will collect, and instead of having to go back and forth from out in the lake back to shore, we take out the barges and then load the Phragmites onto the barge. It's then taken into shore, and it's lifted off and put in a dump truck and carried away, or taken away. So getting rid of the biomass is extremely important because it spreads so easily. So you have to make sure that you get rid of the stalks. And here's L Lake again. This is the arrangement we had with our municipality, was that we would remove the frag to the roadside, and then they came along with their equipment and removed it. It was interesting. The first truck that they brought was just a small one, and then they ended up coming back with this, and they took away probably four loads of Phragmites. So what can you do? Early detection and rapid response is critical in stopping the spread. As with any invasive, if you see it, don't ignore it. In the long run, it'll be more challenging to get rid of and more costly to remove. And an example of this is in our municipality, Grand Bend, just up the shoreline, a resort village. When we first started out, we found 12 small cells of Phragmites. It cost them probably about $4,000 to get rid of it. By comparison, our huge project that we have underway, where we're dealing with about 200 acres of Phragmites in the lake down the shore, it's right now probably at about $500,000. And the difference being, we knew what we were looking for, and we saw it in Grand Bend, and we got on it right away. So I can't stress enough the early detection, rapid response. Ideally, if you're spraying, spray when the plant is 1.5 meters tall. A lot of the farmers in our area like to spray when it's very small, and they don't see the results that you will see if you can spray on that canopy. Think about that canopy that I showed you in one of the slides with the slide with the seed head. And we can advise you if you're interested. The Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group, if you Google that, or the Ontario Invasive Phragmites Working Group is another great resort, the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. So what can you do? First of all, learn how to identify it and how to avoid it accidentally spreading. Do not plant it. Gardeners should only use native or non-invasive plants. One of the plants that we are concerned about now in our area is miscanthus. And so just be aware that that is now kind of taking off along the ditches in our roadsides. Stay on designated trails. Don't compost it. Both seeds and the rhizomes can survive and grow in compost. Get involved with community efforts. If you see volunteers, groups forming, get involved, because in our province, I would say 99% of the work that's being done now across the province is because of volunteer groups such as ours. We really need the support of our governments to help us get this under control. When we have volunteer groups, most of them are like myself, retired, and we need to have sustained funding, and we need the support of our governments to get it under control. So get involved with community efforts, and we have spading events and cutting events. In the wintertime, we've had frag calls, and we've ended up having fires and chili, and so you have to get involved and help and spread awareness and not Phragmites. So I want to just, I have a couple of things. Looking to the future, BASF has a herbicide, Habitat, for overwater use, and it's close to being approved for use in Ontario. At present, as I mentioned, there's no herbicides approved. You must have a letter of opinion in Ontario, which is basically an exemption from the Pesticide Act. If you want to use a herbicide, but you can't use the herbicides over water. So we're hoping that Habitat will be approved. It is now close to going to public consultations. And also something else that has happened that's exciting, but it's not the silver bullet, but it's definitely a help. There have been 2 moths that have been identified, and it looks pretty promising. So Ducks Unlimited Canada is, I believe, partnering with the Invasive Species Center in Ontario and looking into doing some biocontrol research in selected sites. The challenge is that they need to have both the native and the invasive species of Phragmites in doing this. But so those 2 things are promising as more tools that we can add to our toolbox. And I also want to mention that our success, in addition to the management plan and doing the watershed approach, you have to have partners. And we have been so fortunate to have excellent partners throughout the years. And this is just a few of the partners that we have had and continue to have. But the partnerships are extremely important. And also the fact that we have really promoted education as a key part of dealing with Phragmites, especially if you're going to be using chemicals and using herbicides. You have to get out and really educate the community to get them on board. And we have been, again, very successful in getting the support of our community. So I do want to mention our partners, Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, both our conservation areas in Lambton County, St. Clair and Wasaba Bayfield, the Invasive Phragmites Control Center doing great work, and our municipality. So thank you very much, and I can leave that open for some questions. If you have any, please get in touch.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. There are a couple of questions. Anton from Slovenia was wondering about the equipment that you had. Was that not very expensive, and what kind of funding did it require to get that kind of equipment?
Yes, it is expensive. The machines probably I would say around $175,000 each. As I mentioned, Bruce Power, partnering with Dr. Gilbert, Janice was doing extensive work up north along the shoreline where the Bruce Power plant is. And so they were able to help and partner with her. And then we only had one the first year. Then the second year, we added a second, and now there are three. And that is really important because it just, you can imagine, like if you're raking and then or cutting and then you have to change to the rake and you only have one machine, a lot of time is wasted going back and forth. So it's definitely helped having the three. Janice has found the funding on her own, but it is expensive.
One other question, and it may be obvious, but on dry land, you mentioned herbicide. Is that Roundup?
Yes, we Roundup, Vision. There are three herbicides that you can use. Arsenal Powerline is BASF, and Monsanto, it's Vision and Weathermax.
Okay.
But again, I have to stress that if you are using them, you really need to have people who, and again, it's site specific. We have a person with a background in dealing with Phragmites in sensitive environments because that's critical. You just don't go in and and just spray. It's you have to have people that know when they can begin spray programs. And so, yes,
we did have another question that related to it, and that is, you must use licensed applicators by the province.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, Nancy, I'd like to thank you, and a reminder for everyone: there's another session later today. So take a quick break, and at 2 p.m. Eastern Time today. That session is contributing to the tourism appeal of your community. Please be reminded that each webinar has a separate Zoom link to join, so you will need to leave this webinar to join another. And thank you for today's session. Okay, it's taped. We got through it.
We're okay?
We're good. So thank you. That was very technical, but I'm glad we've got it, and I'll be sending that to the head office. So
okay.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right, John, thanks so much for bearing
well, it's important.
With me with this.
It's important.
I imagine you are.
Right close to my place, we have a little creek, and thankfully we have had a good person who's in our conservation authority, Mike, good guy, and they did some backpack spraying. And it was a Phragmites area, and it's now 3 years before, and I don't notice anything coming back.
Good. Where are you, John?
Tillsonburg.
Okay.
Just a little creek that goes near my place, and
yeah.
And there's some really nice native marsh habitat, including the various other proper species, but the Phragmites was beginning to choke it. So yeah, it was good. And that
Well,
early
that's good.
intervention.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
And
early
and as I said, I was so, like, on last Wednesday when I saw on the screen that there were so many people from out west. Like, it's just so important that they know what this looks like and how to get on it fast. And that was the message that Rennie was saying
Yeah,
too.
Rennie gave a good intro from that
Yeah.
perspective. Okay, well, thank you.
Okay,
And
thank
we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, John.
Take care. I'd like to now move on to the rest of the presentation coming forward in about 10 minutes. So we hope that the participants today will be joining in for more of our virtual symposium sessions this week with our national awards and the community showcase at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and wrap up with our town hall session on Friday, October 9th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. At 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, we have our next session titled Contributing to the Tourism Appeal of Your Community. You have a few minutes to grab a coffee, and we hope to see you there. Please be reminded that each webinar has a separate Zoom link to join, so you will need to leave this webinar to join another webinar. And thanks again to both Rennie and Nancy. And we could have went on for, I'm sure, a lot longer, but with the time constraints to get the next session going, sorry, we have to finish it up. So any answers that are, or questions that are still there, we will respond later. Thank you.